Hi, everyone. Hope you're having a great day. And hopefully, you are taking a little bit of time out this weekend to rest and relax and enjoy. But I wanted to share with you this video and some thoughts on this next Show Up Six strategy, which is about having intentional conversations. So, if you've got your copy of the book, we're taking a look on page 109. Now, even if you are a little behind, let's say maybe you didn't dig in as much to one of the strategies or whatever, you can always come back to those. But I want you to take some time and read this particular section in the book. It's about 11 pages. So it's from 109 to 120. And it's really going to help give you some context around why having intentional conversations is essential for how we show up. Now, the quote that I have here is from a psychologist and author. Her name is Gemma Stone. She says, "Act as though each conversation you have is the most important one you will ever have, because in that moment, it is." And I chose that quote because in our work, it is so easy, air quotes around that, it's so easy for us to overlook these conversations we may have with somebody. We may think of it as a check the box. I need to get this done. I need to hurry through this conversation to get to the next one. But the person to whom you are speaking with, they really want your time, or they may not be in that conversation thinking, oh gosh, I don't know what's going to happen here. I want to get this over as well. Make the most of it. Make it a point to open up the space, to hold the space, so you can truly have an intentional conversation. And the goal of any intentional conversation we have is to move that relationship forward. I don't care if you are moving it one step or 10 steps, move the relationship forward. That is always the goal in having an intentional conversation. Now, as I outlined for you, both in the first part of the book as well as the book in general, having intentional conversations were key for me and in the lessons I learned in how to show up. And some people who have read the book have looked at this section as a different take on giving and receiving feedback. And certainly that's a part of it. There is no question about it. But in giving and receiving feedback, there are some different strategies or steps. I like to think of feedback very much like an art or a talent. Um, in previous jobs that I have held, I was someone whom people would say, go talk to John, or they would say, John, will you have this conversation with someone? Because one, they didn't want to have them, but they also knew that I would take care of it and I would do it in a way to do the least amount of harm in having those kind of conversations. They knew I was really good at holding the space for someone when they got upset or when they were angry or when they were elated, even. So, having an intentional conversation is taking all of the things that you have learned and you have read and funneling them down into this goal that we're just going to move the relationship forward. So, in having an intentional conversation, we need to be clear about the differences between need and want. Think about that for a moment. Do you need to have a conversation with someone, or do you want to have a conversation with them? They're two different energy levels that we bring when we need to have a conversation versus we want to have a conversation with someone. You may want to have a conversation with a colleague, with a friend, with a loved one. You may need to have a conversation with that colleague, with that friend, or that loved one. And it may be a different kind of energy or a different kind of circumstance. As leaders, there are times when you need to have conversations with people on your team or people whom you are working with. And in Sherry Harley's book, How to Say Anything to Anyone, which I believe I have told all of you about, which is hands down my favorite feedback book that I have ever read, she has an 8-step protocol for giving feedback. It's a 2-minute protocol. I have used it. It is phenomenal. And you can Google her, you can search her on YouTube. But it's Sherry, Shari, Harley like the motorcycle. And her book is called How to Say Anything to Anyone. Actually, as I'm talking about this, I need to get her on the podcast. So I'll make a note for that. All right. So having an intentional conversation. Do you need to have them or do you want to have them? And in planning for that, you do need to do some prep work into what the conversation is going to be like. Now, we can speculate all day long for what conversations are going to look like or end up with, but it is helpful to do a little prep and walk through those kind of, excuse me, walk through those kind of scenarios or situations. So I'm going to guide you through an exercise here, and you can close your eyes. You can listen to me while you're walking, whatever this is. But I'm going to guide you through this exercise that I do when I am planning to have an intentional conversation with someone. Okay. So I'm going to give you a few seconds just to quiet your mind, get comfortable, and I'm going to guide you through this visualization exercise, and then we'll talk about it on the other end. Okay, so as you're getting comfortable here, you can close your eyes, get the tension out of your neck, take a deep breath in, slowly let it out. Take a deep breath in. Slowly let it out. Imagine that you are standing in front of a door that opens up into a room. And you put your hand on the knob and you turn it. And you open the door to the room. And the only furniture in that room are 2 chairs. And the chairs are seated side by side. What kind of chairs are they? Do they look comfortable to sit in? Are they different colors? And you walk over to the chairs and you pick one to sit in. And as you're looking at the chair next to you, I want you to imagine inviting someone to sit in the chair next to you. Who are you going to invite to sit in the chair next to you? Who are they? What's their relationship to you? And after a few moments, You see them sitting in the chair next to you, and you can feel their energy as they're sitting there next to you. What does that energy feel like? Take a pulse of it. Because without ever saying a word, you are reading the room. You're feeling their energy. What do you expect their energy to be like? Are they happy to see you? Are they nervous or anxious about the conversation? Are they guarded? Are they dismissive? Are they open? You've been wanting to have this conversation with someone for a while. And here they are sitting directly across from you. What are you going to talk about? What do you want to say to them? What do you need to say to them in order to move this relationship forward? And as you start to speak and you say what it is you need to say to them, how do you feel once you have said it? What are you feeling inside after just having this intentional conversation? And how is that person sitting across from you reacting? What do you anticipate their reaction to be? Has their energy shifted? How has their energy changed based on your conversation with them? And after they've had chance to say a few things, what do you say next? Where do you see the conversation going? How does the conversation end? What are the next steps? What are the action items that come out of this conversation? Is there some kind of accountability? When do you see the two of you talking again? And as you both stand up, How does that conversation end? Is it a wave, a handshake, a hug? And as you watch them leave the room, how are you feeling? How do you feel now that you have had this intentional conversation? And as you are evaluating the discussion, the primary question you will ask yourself is, how have you moved this relationship forward with them? Go ahead and take a deep breath. Let it out. And if you've done this exercise, I want you to just come on back. How was that for you? Who sat in the chair next to you? How did that conversation go? I want to be really clear here that having intentional conversations does not mean that every conversation has a happy ending, because it doesn't. That's just life. Sometimes the conversations that we intentionally have can get a little bit ugly. But if we can evaluate that conversation to simply say, I have moved the relationship forward in some way, then you've done a good job. You've done your work. I can share with you that throughout my career, whenever I have had to have a performance conversation with someone, not only have they been some of the hardest conversations I've ever had to have with anybody, but I always came at them from the place that if the role was reversed, I'd want the same thing done for me. So when I have had to call an employee in to notify them they were going on a performance improvement plan, my goal was to move our relationship forward so that we were both clear on what the expectations were, how they were going to be held accountable, and how I was going to be held accountable. And that we both understood that at this fork in the road, one of two things were going to happen. Their performance was either going to improve, or if it didn't, it could lead to a termination. Those are never easy conversations to have. I shared a lot of uncomfortable and uneasy conversations in the first part of my book. And as I'm recording this today, today happens to be National Coming Out Day. And it just takes me back to all of those conversations I had and thinking about, how am I going to move this conversation forward, move this relationship forward in some way. And there was a lot of screaming and a lot of yelling and a lot of crying and a lot of anger and a little bit of laughter along the way. But every time we met, how could I move the relationship forward? And when my family had the intervention for me and we parted ways and we didn't talk to each other for 22 months, I still firmly believe that we move that relationship forward. Because had we not done that, we wouldn't have gotten to the healing on the other side. And as painful and as hard as those 22 months were, it was still part of that process. I want to be really clear. Intentional conversations here are not all fantastic ones to have. That's in the judgment. We know from an energetic lens that the judgment we place on these kinds of situations are going to impact the thoughts we have. They're going to impact what our feelings, action, results are going to be. But as much as that exercise was designed to help guide you through, the truth of the matter is you are never going to be able to play out every possible scenario as to how an intentional conversation is going to go with someone. You just can't. And where we end up in a lot of mind drama and we end up ruminating often is when we try to perseverate on all of these. If I just plan a little bit harder, if I just do this a little bit more. And I see this in interview preps, right? You can fascinate about every single question that they're going to ask you. They're always going to throw you at least one you haven't prepared for. What would it look like for you if you just went into that conversation and knew that no matter what the other person said to you, you were going to be fine? You were going to be able to answer that question as best as possible. Sometimes people don't like it when the person they're talking to gets upset or they may cry on the other end of the phone. You know what that tells me? They're just breathing, they're just reacting. It's the same thing when they get angry. They're just breathing, they're just reacting. And it's my job to hold the space for them. Now, I'm not going to let anyone be abusive, be it physically or verbally, in one of these conversations. But if they cry, they get angry, they get upset, they're just breathing. And we're going to acknowledge and validate those feelings, and we are going to move on. Because the goal is, if I'm having an intentional conversation with you, how are we going to move this relationship forward? Let's say you want to continue the conversation and the other person says, nope, I don't want to. Great. We have moved the relationship forward to now we're at an impasse. So, what does this look like moving forward? The goal is always to move the relationship forward. That's it. Whatever the outcome is, if you are trying for a particular outcome and you are working toward that particular outcome and they don't see that particular outcome, okay, at least you had the conversation. And by nature of that conversation, that relationship has already moved forward. So I'm going to leave you with this. Who do you need to talk to? That's your challenge over the next couple of weeks. Who do you need to talk to? I want you to identify one person, be it at work, at home, friend, relationship, whatever that may be. Identify one person and have an intentional conversation with them. Get really clear about how you want to move that relationship forward and see if it's possible for having that conversation. And when you come to the group call a week from Tuesday, when you come to that call, I'd love for you to share what that intentional conversation looked like Or if you want the group to help you prepare for that conversation, bring that as well. But the goal is to have one intentional conversation and have it. So, who do you need to talk to? And when are you going to have that intentional conversation? I look forward to it. I look forward to hearing from you about this. Share, comment in the group as well. Remember, we're here for each other for support in whatever capacity it is that you need around these strategies. If you want to reach out to me one on one, you can certainly do that as well. But I will tell you this in closing: the more you do and have these intentional conversations, it's not that they necessarily get any easier. You just get better at having them. All right. Remember, how we show up matters. I'll see you real soon. Take care.